Shin was a sad corporate dog who didn't even have a life before he got isekai'd by Truck Kun. However, when he gets adopted and trained by two S-rank mages, he becomes the most powerful magician in existence, so he rises up a shoddy and starts wrecking everyone. The story begins in his previous life when Shin was a corporate slave with zero social life and no one to go back home to. One day, after an exhausting day at work, Shin was too tired to look up at the traffic lights and wrongly crossed the road, which got his back broken by Truck Kun. However, Shin was reincarnated as a baby in another world, but unfortunately, his parents had just been unalived by a demon in the middle of a forest. Thankfully, a powerful wizard named Merlin found him and decided to adopt him as his grandson, teaching him everything he knew. A few years later, Shin has grown into a brave kid capable of using magic to hunt animals on his own. When Merlin sees how much Shin has learned, he tells Shin to start training his swordsmanship too. 2 years later, Merlin believes Shin is finally ready to experience his first demon, so he takes him to the edge of a cliff to find one. There, Merlin demonstrates how to release his magical power to sense other presences in the area, but warns that it might be a little difficult for a newbie. However, Shin farms more aura than Suin Jinwoo, so he casts his search magic easily, and it's even twice the size of Merlin's. While Merlin grows slightly concerned, Shin finally locates a demon and gets excited for his first demon hunt. They both run into the forest, and as soon as Shin spots the demon, he draws his sword to attack. Merlin tries to warn him how dangerous it is, but Shin charges forward without a second thought, and with a few slashes of his blade, he takes down the monster. That night, Merlin tells his friends, Melita and Michelle, about Shin's extraordinary progress, and they all agree he's cracked, but they still love him like family and agree he's ready for the truth. So the next day, Merlin has the talk with Shin, but instead of telling him how to expand a girl's domain, he tells him he's adopted. However, Shin says he already knew, but it doesn't bother him because he's always seen Merlin as his grandpa, which brings the old man to tears. 5 years later, Shin finally becomes an adult by Michael Jackson's standards, so a bunch of his uncles and aunts gather to celebrate him. However, the more they discuss, the more the adults realize that Shin wasn't taught anything about their world other than magic and swordsmanship, which means he's an idiot. At this, they all head to the middle of nowhere to see just how powerful Shin has become, so Merlin warns the others not to drool when their mouths hang open in a second.
Never seen such a pale blue flame in my whole life.
Then, Shin begins to activate one of his custom-made spells and casually launches a magic atomic bomb into the distance, blowing all the stunned adults away. When they return home, the adults agree that Shin is a powerful idiot, which might be dangerous because all the countries would fight over him. At this, his uncle Dis suggests Shin attend a magic academy in his kingdom to teach him restraint and make friends his age. Shin agrees to the idea but wonders how Uncle Dis has a kingdom, so Dis reveals that he's actually a king, and every other adult at the table is some kind of high-ranking personnel. But the real shocker comes when Shin learns that Merlin and Melita were the most powerful mages in their day, and they used to be married. 2 weeks later, Shin heads to the capital with Merlin and Melita, who both agreed to live with him even though they can't stand each other. When they arrive at their mansion, they're greeted by a full team of maids and butlers, and Shin realizes he's a nepo baby. He then heads into town to experience what the average peasant life looks like when he stumbles upon some girls getting harassed by 3 meatheads. Shin nicely tells the men to leave the girls alone, but they laugh at him, wondering what a toothpick plans to do about it. However, when they charge at him, Shin wipes the floor with them in seconds without activating any of his magic. When the gooners run off, the girls, Maria and Cicely, thank him for the save, but all Shin can see is the weapons of mass destruction hanging off Cicely's chest. Afterwards, at a cafe, Maria says they could have easily beaten up the guys if they could use magic already. On hearing this, Shin asks if they're students of the Magic Academy, but Maria explains that they'll be taking the entrance exams soon. So, Shin reveals that he'll be taking the exams too, surprising the ladies, who then freak out, considering how skillful he already is. Shin then suggests they do their best on the exams and shakes hands with Maria. However, when he offers to shake Cicely, she suddenly starts acting like a glitchy bot. Later, Maria starts talking about Merlin and Melita's return to the capital and how she plans to bag their hot grandson, who will also be testing for the Magic Academy. However, Shin doesn't tell them it's him, so he responds vaguely and says he's leaving. After he leaves, Maria talks about how cool Shin is, and Cicely agrees until she talks about taking him for herself. On hearing this, Cicely disagrees, while Maria teases her by asking if it's love at first sight. In response, Cicely says her waters broke the moment she saw Shin, surprising Maria. On the day of the exams, all Shin could think of was passing the exams so he could see Cicely's melons again. While he checks out his exam venue, an idiot named Kurt tries to get him out of the way, but Shin unites his face with the ground, annoying Kurt, who then introduces himself as the heir of a count and threatens to erase Shin's bloodline. Just then, Og, the prince of the kingdom, shows up and tells Kurt that throwing his authority around like that at the academy is punishable by law. On seeing Og, Kurt behaves as Og orders him not to cause problems for anyone. After Kurt angrily walks away, Og introduces himself as the prince, so Shin says they're cousins since he's Dis's son, and while they talk, the ladies wonder why they're speaking so casually. Shortly after, they proceed to write the exams, where the examiner examiner instructs them to cast their strongest magic at targets. While Shin watches the other students chant, only to cast lame spells, he feels embarrassed on their behalf and wonders why they look so satisfied. Finally, when his turn came, the examiner tells him to keep his power under control and avoid destroying the room. Suddenly, Shin activates his magic, surprising the others since he isn't chanting as they did. He then hits his target, resulting in an explosion that freaks everyone out. Some days later, after Shin tops the results list, and when he goes to get his uniform, the attendant tells him that it's been enchanted with defensive magic and warns him against re-enchanting it on his own. In addition, she tells him to prepare a speech for the entrance ceremony since he's the top scorer. Somewhere else, Kurt rages about being ranked as an A class while Shin was ranked as an S class and vows to make him pay for making him look like a dummy. Meanwhile, in his dorm, Shin checks out the enchantment on his uniform and rewrites it to disperse magical attacks and convert it to energy for him. When it works, Shin screams, drawing Melita's attention, so he shows her the enchantment on the uniform, and on checking it out, Melita freaks out too. On the day of the entrance ceremony, when Shin steps up to give his speech, Cicely and Maria realize he's the hero's grandson. Meanwhile, Kurt listens to Shin's speech with a frown and clenched cheeks. On their first day in class, their teacher, Marcus, introduces himself and reveals that he'll be teaching them practical arts. After class, Maria asks to speak to Shin, and Cicely reveals that there's a guy who won't stop pestering her. Suddenly, Kurt shows up and starts barking orders at Cicely, but just when he tries to grab her, Shin slaps him. Annoyed, Kurt points out that she's his fiancée. Despite this, Shin vows to protect her. Cicely then reminds Kurt that she doesn't want a haunted potato like him near her, but when Kurt points out that he could make her father jobless with a single word to his father, Cicely starts fidgeting. Just then, Og shows up on the scene and reminds Kurt of his warning, so Kurt vanishes while Og commends Shin for standing up for Cicely. After this, Shin invites his friends to his house, and Maria suddenly gets all fired up about meeting Melita, so she rushes off to ask her parents. When Og also agrees to visit, Julius and Thor show up and introduce themselves as his escorts. On getting to the house, Shin introduces his friends to Merlin and Marita, leaving them starstruck. Afterwards, when they sit, Shin asks Marita if he could rewrite the enchantment on Cicely's uniform. On hearing this, Melita points out that Shin must be quite serious about keeping her safe and asks Cicely if she's worthy of it. When Shin says she's taking things too far, Melita shuts him up and states that his uniform has become a national treasure-grade protective gear. Suddenly, Cicely tears up and confesses that she was merely trying to get him to sympathize with her plight. She then apologizes and tries to leave, but Melita stops her by saying she would have had her thrown out if she had accepted the enchantments without telling the truth. While Melita commends her for this, Shin says he wasn't played and adds that he helped her because he wanted to. However, he ends by telling her to use him as she pleases, while Marita apologizes for testing her. Some moments later, Melita helps Cicely get changed, so Shin works his magic on her uniform, surprising everyone present. After he's done, he points out that the uniform can't protect her from sneak attacks since it requires some degree of magic to activate it and attacks aimed at uncovered body parts. Just then, Dis warns Shin never to tell anyone about the enchantment since it'll cost a fortune and might put him at risk if it gets out. Just when Shin almost changes his mind about putting the enchantment of Og's uniform, Dis says it's okay as long as he doesn't misuse it. Later that day, after Shin has enchanted all his friends' uniforms, except Maria, who says she's uninterested in wearing state secrets, he announces that he'll be taking Cicely home from then on. Surprised, Cicely asks if it'll be convenient for him, but Shin suddenly opens a gate and takes them to Merlin's house in the forest. He then explains that the magic can only work for places he's been before and says he can take Cicely after he takes a carriage there. Some days later, Cicely thanks Shin for coming all the way to pick her up for school, but Shin says he simply used the gate magic and takes the chance to riz her up. Meanwhile, Maria follows them, regretting how she fumbled all her talking stages. On getting to school, Og teases Shin for being a ladies' magnet, and while he greets his other classmates, a blonde klutz named Alice rushes in and says she was late because she overslept. Just then, Marcus arrives, and while he gives them a tour of the school, he explains that some rooms are used for study groups. Curious, Shin asks if the groups are like clubs, and Marcus confirms this by explaining what the groups do. On hearing this, Julius says he would gladly join the body language study group if it weren't for his duty guarding August, so Og tells him to go ahead since his authority as a royal doesn't hold at the academy. Just then, Alice asks Shin if he'd like to join any of the groups, but Og responds, saying that none of the groups would be challenging enough for him, so he suggests that Shin start a club of his own, and when Marcus agrees, everyone says they'd like to join the group. After this, Shin asks Marcus what it takes to start a group, and he explains that they need 5 or more members and a faculty advisor. When he tells them to submit a request form and offers to be their advisor, Thor asks what the group would be about, and Alice suggests that the group focus on talking about heroes like Merlin and Melita. However, Marcus points out that there's a study group focused on that. Just then, another classmate named Lin suggests that they focus on mastering all kinds of magic and proposes naming it the Ultimate Magic Study Group. Somewhere else, Dis reads about the increase in demon appearances in his kingdom and asks one of his subordinates, named Dominic, about it. However, Dominic says that someone must be behind the subtle increase over the year, so Dis orders him to enlist the Demon Hunters Society and thoroughly investigate. At Kurt's house, his father suddenly crashes out while stating that he was summoned by the king and was warned because Kurt was intimidating others at the academy with his family name. Despite this, Kurt feels no remorse and says that they shouldn't be treated the same as commoners since he's special. Suddenly, Kurt gets furious and blames Shin for everything that's gone wrong with him, but his father slaps him and orders him to be locked up. The next day, Og tells his classmates about Kurt's situation, surprising Shin, who then asks why he's acting crazy. In response, Thor explains that he used to be normal until he started visiting the lab of Professor Oliver. While Shin wonders who that is, Og explains that Oliver transferred in as a magic teacher, claiming to have been exiled from the Empire, and invited everyone who was average with magic to his lab. But Og adds that they turned down his shady offer, while Thor adds that Oliver acted normally, even though he's blind, and chips in that he might be using a special kind of magic. Later that day, Oliver visits Kurt's home and asks about him, but his mother suddenly gets emotional as she explains. Oliver then says he'll have some words with him, but on entering the room, he reminds Kurt that he's special and can have anything he wants. Just then, Kurt says he couldn't get his dream girl because Shin got in his way, so Oliver infuses a dark power into Kurt while telling him to teach Shin a lesson. Shortly after, he takes his leave while smiling mischievously. At the school, during break, Og asks Shin if he'll keep escorting Cicely home since Kurt has been grounded, but Shin states that he's too hooked on those melons to stop walking her home. Suddenly, Cicely jumps to her feet and states that their houses are in the same direction. When Maria calls her a shameless simp, Cicely feels embarrassed and says she's not. Meanwhile, Og commends Shin for openly admitting that he's a milkshake mechanic and says that walking the ladies to school is a good idea since their impeccable face cards are bound to attract trouble. However, Shin states that his search magic will detect incoming threats if that ever happens. Surprised, Maria asks how, and Shin asks if they can't sense when ill will is directed at them. When Thor confirms that they can't, Shin asks if he's ever hunted a demon, but Thor says they can't. So, Shin explains that the magic power of demons is abnormal, surprising Lin, who then asks if he's hunted demons before. When he confirms that he once hunted a demon bear, his classmates freak out, making him realize he's the odd one out. Later that day, as they head back to class, Shin suddenly feels ill will directed towards them and spots Kurt emerging from a nearby bush as he casts a fire spell aimed at them. Quickly, Shin rushes over and casts a protective spell to protect his friends, while asking them to channel magic energy into their uniforms. When they do this, Kurt fires off another attack, but Shin's barrier blocks it, burning his hands in the process. Suddenly, Cicely exclaims on seeing his burned hands, but Shin shows her that it's healing already. After this, Shin wonders what he's doing there and states that he's trying to unalive them. Just then, Kurt charges up again with demonic energy, making Shin wonder if he's being controlled. He then figures that Kurt is demonized and asks Og to get the others away. Worried, Og warns him to get away too, but Shin says he can't allow a demonoid run loose in the capital. So Og offers to help, but Shin says he's inexperienced and will get in his way. Og then tells Maria to get Cicely away and tells the others to notify the teachers. After Og hides, Kurt suddenly goes crazy and charges towards Shin, who then activates his magic and evades the attack. Immediately, Kurt goes after him, but Shin blasts him with a series of flame attacks that knock him down. This leaves Shin worried, since he was only trying to slow him down, so Kurt gets back up more furious and screams at Shin. However, this surprises Shin, since he thought demonoids lose all sense of reasoning. Suddenly, Kurt shoots another fire spell at him, but Shin blocks the attack and levitates before striking him with lightning. On realizing that Kurt isn't fully demonoid, Shin wonders if there's a way to turn him back, but Kurt attacks again. He then evades the attacks, and as he approaches Kurt, he notices him trying to blow himself up with the entire school. At that moment, Shin realizes he's out of options, so he draws his sword and takes out Kurt to prevent the explosion. Feeling guilty, he drops his sword and grieves his first murder while his friends return, and Cicely checks him out for any injuries. Afterwards, Oliver feels good about the success of his experiment while watching Shin from the top of a nearby building. Meanwhile, in the building, Og asks Shin why his mood dropped when he just saved the day, so Shin explains that he's bothered that someone might be responsible for Shin's conversion, since he could still speak in his demonoid form and was weak while they fought. While his classmates marvel at this, Shin points out that Kurt might have been used in human experimentation. Shortly after, when they return to the house, Shin finds Dis talking to his grandparents, and suddenly, a soldier salutes him for risking his life to save the kingdom from the demonoid's attack and announces that he's been rewarded with a medal. However, Merlin isn't pleased with this, so she reminds Dis of his promise not to use Shin for political purposes. However, Dis explains that a demonoid once attacked the kingdom before, and since the threat has been eliminated, it has to be made public. Merlin then asks what the award is for, and Dis explains Shin was awarded because he accomplished the same feat as the two of them. After this, Dis promises to protect Shin from those seeking to exploit him, while Merlin says they'll leave the kingdom if he breaks his promise. The next day, on their way to school, the ladies won't stop talking about Shin and how he defeated a demonoid. Hearing this, Shin wonders why the news spread widely when Dis already issued a gag order, but his friends remind him that such rumors can't be kept secret. Just Just then, Maria and Cicely overhear some ladies saying that one of them might be Shin's fiancé, so Cicely suddenly turns red, while Shin apologizes for putting her in the spotlight. However, Cicely walks beside him and says she's hanging around him because she wants to. Meanwhile, at school, a crowd of students pester Marcus for a chance to join Shin's study group, but since there are too many of them, Marcus says the minimum requirement for joining the club is the ability to use other dimensional storage space. Meanwhile, at the palace, Dis tells his subordinates about Shin's idea that the demonoid was artificially created, and orders Dennis, the security bureau chief, and Dominic to investigate the situation. Later, at school, two of the new students who met Marcus's requirement join Shin and his group members in a study room and introduce themselves as Mark and Olivia. Since Mark's family runs a famous smithy shop, Shin asks if he can make anything. In response, Mark says he can, but adds that he's still learning. When Shin mentions getting a new sword, Mark quickly refuses and says he's not worthy of making swords for slaying demonoids. However, Shin clarifies that he was using a regular sword enchanted with magic when he defeated the demonoid. He then takes out the sword from his storage and hands it over to Mark while saying he'd like it to be thinner. When Mark agrees to work on it, Og comments on how amazing Shin's ideas are, and Yuri agrees while stating that she's not as good with enchantments as she thought. Just when Shin offers to ask Melita to show her how it's done, Yuri excitedly displays her Milky Way bubbles before Shin, making Cicely jealous. Sometime later, some bureau officers investigating Kurt's case visit Oliver and introduce themselves as Alt and Carlos. They then ask if he's using magic to replace his lost sight, and Oliver confirms this while explaining how he was born into a noble family but lost his sight during a power struggle. After this, he asks the men what they want and questions him about his activities with his students. Oliver responds by saying that most of his students improve in their magic, except Kurt, whose death was unfortunate. So, Alt reveals that they're assembling specialists to examine what happened to Kurt's demonized body and requests Oliver's help, so he agrees and leaves with them. Meanwhile, during break, Cicely asks Shin why he's zoned out, and he says he was thinking of how to improve his sword. Mark then asks about his sword preference, and when Shin says he'd like a thin blade that doesn't break easily, Alice suggests that he replace the blades when they break. However, Shin says he doesn't get enough allowance to do that, surprising his friends as he explains that his grandparents don't give him too much so that he can learn to manage money. After this, Tony points out that Alice's suggestion is a good idea, so Mark suggests that they head to the workshop to try it out, and the other boys say they'd like to tag along. Somewhere else, the bureau officers and Oliver arrive at the parade grounds, and as they head in, he asks why the examination is taking place there. Suddenly, soldiers rush in from all directions, while Alt points out that Oliver screwed up when he revealed that he's aware of Kurt's death, since the king had given a gag order to protect the victim's family. Suddenly, Oliver laughs and says that he thought everyone was aware. Just then, Alt asks him what he was trying to achieve, and Oliver reveals that it was just an experiment, surprising Alt. Suddenly, Oliver says his experiments are completed, and as he prepares to escape, Alt orders the men to seize him. Meanwhile, as Shin and his friends leave the cafeteria, Oliver blows a hole through a nearby wall. On seeing this, Og identifies Oliver, while Alt, who's been injured, tells them to run because Oliver is responsible for Kurt's demonization. While Oliver brags about this, Shin suddenly draws a vibrating sword from his storage and charges towards Oliver as he attacks with a spell. However, Oliver blocks the attack with a defensive spell and evades his attacks with the vibrating sword. Amused, Oliver asks if the sword is magic, but Shin responds with more attacks, so Oliver retaliates with a spell that throws Shin back. Suddenly, Oliver levitates and taunts Shin for being unable to levitate, so Shin casts a spell on his feet as he leaps high and takes a swing that cuts Oliver's eye patch. However, Oliver repels him with a spell that throws him back on the ground. Just then, they all spot Oliver's red eyes and realize he's a demonoid. Surprised, Shin asks how his sense of reasoning is still intact. Just then, Oliver says that human lives don't mean a thing to him since he became a demonoid. Annoyed by this, Shin attacks him with a spell, but Oliver evades it, and just when he tries to retaliate, Shin hits him with a multi-layered spell that erases him from existence with sun rays. After the dust clears up, Shin's friends check out the impact of Shin's attack and wonder how he created the heat rays. Meanwhile, Shin uses his search magic but can't find Oliver, so he wonders if he really got him. Just then, Rupert, the captain of the court magic division, shows up and appreciates Shin for saving them all, while Dominic introduces himself as the Knight Commander. Just then, Rupert asks how he defeated Oliver, and Shin explains that converged heat from the sun was blasted down as a heat ray. Sometime later, Melita asks Maria what she thinks about Cicely and Shin, and she comments that they've obviously caught the love virus. Melita then asks if they're already a thing, but she responds, saying that Cicely has no idea that she's in love. When Melita asks why she thinks so, Maria says that although Cicely has a face card that makes boys dump their ride or die, she's shamelessly simping for Shin. Sometime later, while Shin heads to Mark's workshop, workshop to get his sword, Og notices that he's moody and asks why he's frowning. In response, Shin says that Oliver is alive, surprising Og, who then asks how he knows. So Shin explains that he saw the impacts of his attack on the parade grounds and insinuates that Oliver fakes his death to trick them. On hearing this, Og tells him to order whatever he needs at the smithy's workshop and says that the royal family will bear the costs. Shortly after, they arrive at the workshop, where they find Mark and Olivia, surprising Shin, who then asks why they're together so early in the morning. Suddenly, Cicely and Maria grab Olivia to go interrogate her, while Mark takes his friends to see Harold, his dad. Just when Harold crashes out at him for interrupting his work, Og apologizes on his behalf and introduces himself, making Harold and the other workers freak out. After this, Og asks Harold to design a weapon for Shin and introduces him as Merlin's grandson. Hearing this, Harold freaks out and asks what kind of weapon they need him to make. Somewhere in a different empire, Harold asks a man named Zest how he gathered information about the kingdom of Earlside, and Zest reveals that he's working with someone within the kingdom who told him that the kingdom is in commotion over the increase of demons. Excited, Harold says it might be his chance to take over the kingdom. When Zest says he hopes it is, Harold says he doesn't need well wishes from commoners and says he'll be honored for the information. When Shin and his friends prepare to leave the workshop, he spots a building and asks Mark what is sold there. When Mark reveals that it's an accessories shop, Shin asks Cicely if she likes accessories, making her freak out, thinking he's about to pop the question. However, Shin states that he was just thinking that it might be more effective to enchant accessories. Suddenly, everyone gets pissed at him for trashing poor Cicely's hopes. So Shin and Cicely visit the shop, where he asks her to pick an accessory, but Cicely says she can't decide. So Shin chooses a ring and puts it on her finger, making her excited as he holds her hand and says it'll keep her safe. The next day at Earlside Royal Castle, a ceremony was held to award Shin, and the moment he entered the hall, he was welcomed as the savior of the kingdom and welcomed with applause. After he gets awarded, Dis informs the officials about his promise to ensure that no one uses Shin for political or military gain and tells them never to forget it. Some days later, when Shin prepares to leave for school with his friends, he opens the door and finds a crowd rushing towards him for signatures and pictures. He quickly shuts the door and wonders what's going on, so Maria explains that he's become a celebrity overnight. After this, Shin decides to use the gate magic, and when they arrive at the school, he gets startled by Yuri's humongous pair of melons. Curious, his group members ask about the gate magic, and Shin explains that it's a magic that connects two different places. When Lin asks if it's different from teleportation magic, Shin confirms this by explaining that teleportation magic relocates an object, while gate magic simply shortens the distance between two locations. Despite this, Lin looks confused, so Shin tells her not to think too much about it, since even Merlin doesn't understand how it works. He then says that she'll soon learn to use it too, since she's a part of his study group. Suddenly, Shin thinks of holding a boot camp where he'll drill his friends hard, and smiles mischievously. Seeing this, Og immediately realizes he's up to no good. Afterwards, Shin addresses his group members and says it's time for them to level up to prepare them for whatever happens next. In response, Og says it's not a bad idea and asks Shin what he has in mind. So Shin reveals that he plans to get them able to pull off a certain level of attack and defense magic and enchant some defense accessories. Just then, he suggests they start by checking their magic control, but Thor comments that higher level magic requires chanting and precise visualizations, but Shin says that all they need is magic power to act as fuel and the ability to control it. After this, he tells Maria to conjure up a magical barrier, but when she does, he flicks it with a finger and says it's too thin. He then tells Cicely to put up a barrier using her enchanted ring, so Cicely puts up a dense barrier that makes the other freak out. Shortly after, Shin points out that just like Oliver blocked his attacks using a barrier, they can also do the same and demonstrate their magic control. Overwhelmed by this, his friends freak out while he explains that they won't get anywhere if they can't master their control of magic, so he announces that they'll practice magic control from that moment on. Meanwhile, somewhere in the Blue Sphere Empire, Oliver recovers while a lady named Miria informs him that the kingdom is preparing for war. On hearing this, Oliver points out that Zest must have done his job well and asks Miria what he thinks will happen. However, Miria says she can't tell yet, leaving Oliver amused. Back at the kingdom, Shin arrives home with his friends, who were quite thrilled to see his grandparents, so Merlin if he's throwing a house party, but Shin states that they had to jump in because there was a crowd at the school gate. Merlin then laughs it off and says it'll die down soon. After Shin tells his grandparents what they've been up to at the study group, Alice points out that they're Merlin's second-generation students, since he taught Shin magic. However, Merlin clarifies that Shin has his own way of visualizing the process of magic rather than the outcome, and questions how things work. Suddenly, Merlin opens a magic gate, surprising Shin, while Merlin states that he eventually figured it out after Shin's explanation. He then points out that if Shin can do it, they can too. Afterwards, Melita commends Merlin for making Shin look less like a weirdo. The next day, Lin shows up at school with her face all wrecked, and when Shin asks what happened, she says it was a magic control practice gone wrong. When he asks if she didn't blow up the building, Lin states that her father has a practice room at home. Afterwards, they visit Mark's family workshop, where the sword prototype for Shin had been completed, so he presses the trigger, and when the blade pops out, Shin gives credit to Tony for the idea. Afterwards, Shin announces that he got some accessories for his friends and promises to enchant them with defensive magic. Just then, Og suggests adopting his sword design for the army, and Shin says he's cool with it if Tony is. So, Og reveals that the kingdom might be going to war with the Blue Sphere Empire soon, but when Thor points out that they'll all get drafted when it begins, Og assures them that it hasn't started yet. However, Shin says he'll go to war if any of his friends are in danger. At the Blue Sphere Empire, Harold gets furious when his men report that his army was almost wiped out in an ambush near the kingdom. They had proceeded to attack based on Zest intel, so when the men suggest that they retreat and regroup, Harold asks about Zest, and the men reveal that he and his men have been missing. Feeling betrayed, Harold vows to have him flayed the next time they meet. Suddenly, a soldier rushes in to announce that demons have invaded the capital, so Harold orders all his troops to fall back to the capital immediately. Meanwhile, at Earlside Kingdom, Rupert and Dominic discuss Blue Sphere's retreat and deliberate on their next action. Just when Dominic suggests pressing on and dealing with the enemies, a soldier shows up to inform them that their advance guard was attacked by demons, surprising Rupert, who then asks if the demons are aiding the Empire's retreat. On the streets of Blue Sphere, the demons snack on the people while Oliver takes a stroll with Rhea. He then asks her how it feels to become a demonoid, and she says she feels more powerful than ever. After this, Oliver states that Zest and his men will return in 3 days and suggests they prepare to receive them. Meanwhile, Harold angrily heads to his throne room and rants about the demons while his men assure him that the situation is under control. On getting there, Oliver, who's sitting on the throne, welcomes him and snaps his fingers to shut the door behind him. Suddenly, Oliver casts a spell that binds Harold to a spot and blasts him out of existence. Later, Rupert and Dominic check out the ruins left behind by the demon attacks in Blue Sphere, and while they wonder what happened, Oliver welcomes them from the shadows. Alarmed, Dominic draws his sword as they ask Oliver if he's responsible for the attacks. In response, Oliver thanks them for taking out a number of the Imperial forces and making it easy for him to wipe them out. After Oliver confirms that he instigated the war, Dominic suddenly realizes they are surrounded by demonoids. Meanwhile, Marcus notifies his students that Oliver has been spotted at the Imperial capital, and since his plans are unknown, they might be needed to fight. So he reveals that they'll be jointly training with the Knights School. Shortly after, Shin notices his classmates are moody and asks what's up with them. In response, Maria states that, unlike them, the Knights focus mainly on physical training and adds that the students at the Knight Training School make fun of them by calling them sprouts. To be fair, Thor points out that they also make fun of the Knight students by calling them muscle brains. However, Shin points out that all that doesn't matter since they're at war, but his classmates won't stop talking about their beef with the Knights. So Shin talks about complementing each other's strengths, but Maria says it's because he can use both magic and the sword. Just then, Cicely asks Shin if he was trained by a knight, and when he reveals that he was trained by Michelle, his friends freak out, asking if he's referring to the knight commander of the order. Suddenly, Yuri points out that Shin learned everything from the best since he learned from the Sword Saint. While Shin wonders what that is, Thor explains that Michelle is the goat of swordsmanship. On the day of the training, 4 teams from each school were put on a team to hunt demons. So while Shin chats with Cicely, the knight students spot him and think he's just a magician who might slow them down. Shortly after, while they ride in the same carriage, the Kreis, Miranda, Noin, and Kent introduce themselves, and Shin asks if any of them has ever fought a demon. Annoyed, Miranda asks if he's trying to brag since he defeated a demonoid, but Shin states that he's not and adds that they'll die if they're hung on some lame beef and try to fight a demon together. However, Miranda tells him they don't need the magicians to take down demons, and Kreis warns them not to slow them down. Just then, Og asks if they see the training as a competition, and says it's meant to strengthen the connection between both schools, so he tells Shin not to fight during the exercise and tells the knights to defeat the demon by themselves. Later, while they explore the forest, Cicely points out that their group is supposed to be accompanied by an advisor. Just then, Chris and Sieg show up to supervise them, and the knights and magic students start fawning over them. So Shin wonders why, and Cicely explains that Sieg and Chris are quite popular in both schools, while Og chips in that they're both magicians and knights entrusted with the king's safety. Afterwards, they arrive in the deepest part of the forest, and Og tells Sieg to let the knights fight the demon first since they don't realize the significance of the training, while Maria chips in that she hopes they realize their mistake. Shortly after, Shin notices the knights on guard and wonders why, since he can't sense any demon nearby. Suddenly, Shin spots a demon with his search magic and informs Sieg, who then tells the knights to prepare since the demon is approaching. Suddenly, the demon board charges towards them from the forest, and Miranda tells her comrade to show the sprouts what they're made of. So they attack at once, but get knocked around by the enraged beast. Just when the beast tries to finish them off, Shin draws his vibrating sword and slices its head off. Shocked, the knights wonder how he pulled it off, while Chris comments that they're a disgrace to the night school and tells them to lock in for the rest of the exercise. Quickly, Cicely casts her healing spell on the knights, making them apologize for looking down on magicians. When Cicely says they're on the same team, Shin suddenly feels jealous. Subsequently, when the knights are being nice to Cicely, Shin feels like he's about to explode, so Og tells him not to get upset if he can't tell the guys that she's his woman. Hearing this, this, Shin freaks out while Maria and Lin complain about being ignored by guys. Suddenly, Sieg informs them to stop screwing around, since there are more demons on the way. So, Shin checks with his magic search and discovers that it's a horde, with one of them being high level. Suddenly, the knights rush back to inform them about the horde, so Shin says he can take care of them. Just when Shin activates his magic and generates some energy in both hands, a tiger demon leaps out of the forest. Shin then says he's upset and needs to let off some steam, so he claps his hands, unleashing an explosion that wipes out the demons and clears out a part of the forest trees. Shocked by this, everyone wonders if he's human, while Cicely rushes over to see if he's hurt. Miranda then apologizes to him for being rude and to Cicely for crashing out at her boyfriend. Hearing this, they both freak out, so Miranda asks if they're not a thing, but they claim they're not. Some moments later, they run into a bear demon, so Og, Maria, and Cicely cast a fire spell at it. Immediately, the knights move in to attack, but the bear attacks. Luckily, Shin puts up a barrier that blocks the slash, giving the knights an opening. Immediately, they stab the bear monster, while Miranda leaps high to finish it off. Afterwards, Cicely asks if anyone is injured and heals them. Watching this, Chris comments that they're finally working together as a team. Surprised, Sieg asks Shin how Og and the others improved so fast, since they're as good as the best court magicians. In response, Shin reveals that he created a new study group at the academy where they practice everything Merlin taught him. Curious, Sieg asks if they're doing anything else, and Shin reveals that he also taught them how to visualize magic as he does. On hearing this, Sieg asks if he can also learn from the study group, and Shin agrees. However, Og joins them and points out that teaching Sieg his magic would cause problems since he's a part of the military. In addition, Og states that the world could be destroyed by humans and not demons if Shin's magic spreads to neighboring lands. After this, Sieg asks if they can tell him how Merlin asked them to practice, and Og tells him to practice his magic control daily while gradually increasing the amount of magic. Surprised, Sieg asks if that's all, and to prove this, Og summons the ladies and tells them to project a magical barrier. Suddenly, the ladies put up their barriers, surprising Sieg at how thick they are. When Maria says hers is thin compared to Cicely's, Sieg tells her to believe in herself with an intensity that makes her knees weak. Somewhere else, Mark, Tony, Julius, and Lynn are on a different team with Julio, a knight looking like he wants to devour Tony. Curious, Mark asks if he did something to him, and Tony explains that they've known each other since middle school. Suddenly, Julio calls Tony a weakling for running away to the Magic Academy. Suddenly, a wolf demon jumps out of the forest, and the magicians suggest they cast their spells first, but Julio says there's no need. When he charges towards the demon, their supervisor cautions him, saying it's a joint effort, but Julio ignores him, and the other knights decide to fight too. Unfortunately, more demons jump out and attack them, while the magicians make it rain fire on the demons and scare their supervisor. After this, Tony asks Julio if he's alright, but he angrily says it's none of his business. Just then, Julius joins them and points out that Julio must hate Tony so much, but Tony says they were once friends until he started flaring up at every little thing. When Mark says he must have done something, Tony suddenly recalls that a girl Julio liked once fell for him, and he took her out. When he points out that he smashed his crush and broke up with her, Julio shows up fuming like a traumatized simp. Meanwhile, on a different team, the knights roast Alice, Yuri, Olivia, and Thor, but their supervisor shuts them up and reminds them it's a training. Just then, the knights tell the magicians to keep quiet and watch them hunt the demons. However, the moment the demons attack and almost devour the knights, the magicians intervene, casting their spells. Suddenly, Olivia casts an electric spell that she couldn't control and ends up blowing everything and everyone up. Later, when all the groups converge at the Capitol gate, Shin sees Olivia's team looking toast, so he asks what happened, and Alice explains that they outdid themselves. Turning to Tony's team, Shin asks why Julio looks like a time bomb, and Julius explains that it's a rift between the boys. When Lynn asks Shin how things went with his group, Maria states that Shin and Cicely were getting cozy all through. After this, Og announces that all of them in the study group except Shin will be placed under national supervision after graduation as part of a special unit, since other nations might be interested in them. So Shin apologizes for changing the course of their lives, but they all scream in excitement. While he wonders why they're happy, Og tells Shin that they could become the hope of saving the world as long as they don't misuse their powers. On hearing this, Olivia says that they'll need to learn more if they're going to be a special unit, and while Shin thinks she's right, Og warns him not to get any funny ideas. A few days later, Shin's group members try out their attacks in the mountains, and while they watch, Og tells Shin that they can't allow anyone to find out about it. In response, Shin says he's used the location many times, and they have nothing to worry about. So, Og informs them that they'll become an important part of the forces once they're at war with the demonoids. In addition to this, Og reveals that demonoids are running riots all over the Empire and damaging their towns and villages. As a result of this, Og says that both nations have to form a coalition to be able to withstand them. To make matters worse, Og states that there are more demonoids with every attack, since the victims are being turned like Kurt was. While listening, Shin wonders what Oliver is up to, and afterwards, they decide to hold a training camp during summer break. When Shin suggests that they train in the mountains and find somewhere to stay, Og suggests that they stay on one of their lands. Just then, Maria suggests using Cicely's place, since her family owns a hot spring area. area. Later that evening, Shin informs his grandparents about the camp, and Merlin points out that it's a good idea. However, Melita asks what he plans to do about supervision, surprising Shin, who then asks what she means. Suddenly, Melita screams at Shin, asking if he's planning to host a spicy party for his friends. After stating that she won't have it, Melita nominates herself to supervise them while Merlin says he'd like to go too. The next day, when the students arrive for the trip, they all leave on a carriage. On the way, Shin suddenly senses some demons nearby, and when his friends confirm that they sense them too, they stop the convoy and step out. When they all say they'd like to take out the demons, Shin suggests they draw lots. Shortly after, Olivia faces off against some wolf demons and sends them all flying with her lightning spell. Afterwards, they arrive at Claude and are welcomed by Cicely's folks, who then tell Shin to take care of Cicely, making them both freak out. Later that day at the men's bath, Merlin thanks Shin's friends for hanging around him, since he's never had a friend his own age. Just then, his friends talk about their friendship with him while Shin thanks Merlin for raising him right, making Merlin tear up. Meanwhile, at the ladies' bath, Maria compliments Melita's nice figure, and Alice asks for tips to make her body tea. In response, Melita tells her to ask Cicely for tips on how to grow her melons. The next day, while Merlin supervises the students during practice, Lynn starts generating too much energy again, so he warns that she'll lose control, so she shuts it down. Moments later, Melita holds an enchantment class, and Shin feels grateful to have them both helping out. Afterwards, the students put up a barrier to withstand Shin's attack, so he activates his magic and starts creating a new form of magic. Seeing this, his friends brace for impact while Shin suddenly cooks up a twister with his spell. Suddenly, he fires off the spell in the opposite direction, and just when he gets excited, Melita scolds him and asks what he needs that much force for. On seeing the impact of his spell, Shin says he didn't expect it to be that strong, while Melita tries to threaten to break his head. At the same time, his friends realize how lucky they are that he attacked in the opposite direction. After this, as they all prepare to head back, Og asks Shin to open a gate to the castle and says he needs to get information about the demonoids. Shortly after, they arrive at the castle where Og finds Ellie, his angry fiancée, waiting. When he explains who she is to Shin, Ellie approaches them and introduces herself. When Og asks what she's doing at the castle, Ellie crashes out, asking why he could leave her and May behind to go camping. While Shin wonders who May is, Og explains that she's his younger sister. So May shows up and calls Og a terrible brother since Melita, who's her idol, was at the camp and he left her behind. After throwing a tantrum, saying she'd like to meet Melita, May introduces herself to Shin, who then tells her to quit being formal. Afterwards, Og asks what they're doing, and the ladies say they've decided to join them at the camp. Suddenly, Og retorts, saying it's not happening since the camp is not a playground. Shortly after, this tells Og to take them with him, since Shin's grandparents are there, and they could use the hot springs for a change. So, they return to Claude, and the moment the ladies cross the gate, they freak out. Just then, Og explains that the camp is for training, and they don't have time to offer anyone princess treatment. In response, Ellie says she won't be in their way since all she wants is to keep the other girls off her territory. Amused by this, Shin asks if she doesn't trust Og around other ladies, but Ellie says she is more wary of him, since Og won't stop talking about him. Shin then says he can't imagine him and Og getting cozy, while Og says he's just happy to have a friend he feels so at home around, making her jealous. After begging her to understand, they eat at a diner, and there, Og reveals that Shin has a girl he's crazy about. Surprised, Shin asks what he's talking about, so Og advises him to shoot a shot, since he's sure he and Cicely like each other. Shin then asks how he's sure and wonders what he'd do if Og is wrong, but Og tells him to grow some balls and states that he bagged Ellie when he was way younger. Later, when they join the others, Ellie meets Cicely and realizes she's the girl Og spoke about, while May comments that Shina and Cicely look cute together, making Shin freak out. Shortly after, Ellie and May introduce themselves while Shin tells Melita that May is a big fan of hers. On hearing this, Melita walks up to May and says she must be disappointed to find out that her idol is old. However, May says she's pretty, and they hold hands while Melita comments that girls are adorable, unlike Shin. In response, Shin says he held her hands a lot when he was younger, but Melita says it's because she was keeping him on a tight leash. Just then, Yuri chips in that it must have been difficult to raise Shin and hopes that parenting gets easier when it's her turn. Suddenly, Cicely lets her intrusive thoughts win and states that she'll have adorable babies with Shin and would gladly hold their hands. On realizing that she's on speaker, Cicely freaks out and escapes before her friends start roasting her, while Og asks Shin if he now gets it. Later that night, Shin spots Cicely sitting under a shed nearby, so he joins her and says he just needs to cool off, since he just got out of the hot spring. After a moment of awkward silence, Cicely apologizes for embarrassing herself earlier, but Shin says he was flattered. After this, he asks if she remembers when they first met, and they both laugh about the memory. Shin then rizzes her up with some knee-breaking lines. mountains, while Cicely also admits that she found him attractive at first sight. Just then, Shin confesses his love for her and asks her to be his girlfriend. Moved to tears by this, Cicely says yes, but just as they're about to kiss, their friends gate crash and ruin the moment. Annoyed, Shin asks why they're snooping around, but Alice and Maria scream back at him, saying they won't miss it for the world. Surprisingly, Merlin and Melita show up too and congratulate Shin, so shortly after, Shin announces that he and Cicely are now dating. However, after Og congratulates him, he points out that they're in the middle of a crisis. The next day, they all gather at the beach where Shin announces that they'll be playing beach ball, and they're all allowed to use their magic on the ball and nothing else. As the match goes on, a flaming ball almost hits Alice, and Yuri crashes into her, but Merlin quickly steps in and stops the ball with a barrier. Melita then gives them an earful for playing dangerously, and when they apologize, Merlin comments that they need to learn control, so he tells them to continue training. Later at night, the students all stay up, talking about how they all met Og at a party when they were younger. Maria then points out that there were a lot of girls around Og back then, and he confirms it by saying they were all buttering him up. Just then, Ellie says she didn't even get close to Og and narrates how unfazed she was when he asked her to be his fiancée. Afterwards, Og says he was attracted by the cold look Ellie gave him, while Maria laments about being the ugly friend nobody wants. Suddenly, Melita barges into the room but finds everyone asleep. Unknown to her, they're all hiding under the sheets. Unfortunately for Shin, he's cuddled up with Cicely under a sheet, and she starts making happy noises because his hands are on her melons. Shocked, Shin jumps up when he sees her in her nightwear, and Melita shows up behind him, asking if he's already eating the forbidden fruit right after they started dating. The next morning, Shin steps out with bags under his eyes, since he couldn't stop thinking about Cicely and her nighties. Just then, he runs into her, and after they both glow like stop signs, she suggests they get breakfast. However, Cicely says they need a favor, and shortly after they both arrive at Cicely's home through a gate. On getting there, she apologizes for making requests so early, but Shin says it's fine, since he has to make their relationship known to her parents. A few moments later, Cicely's parents ask them why they came all the way to see them, and Shin reveals that they're not dating. When he asks for their approval, Cecil grabs Shin's hands and thanks him for choosing Cicely. Just then, Eileen tells him to calm down and says that as a daughter of a viscount, Cicely can't be permitted to date without being engaged, and Shin affirms that he's ready to do anything, surprising Cicely. Just then, Eileen tells Cicely that her dreams have finally come true, but Cicely tells her not to say that in front of Shin. Later that day, while the students train in the mountains, Ellie wonders what kind of magic they're performing, but Shin says they're just warming up, surprising her. Just then, Merlin asks Ellie and May if they'd like to try as well, but Ellie refuses, saying she's not good with magic. However, May says she'd like to try, so Merlin decides to start her off on some basic magic control exercises. Moments later, May freaks out when she sees how much magic she could control, and Melita points out that she has the potential to become a magician. Hearing this, Lynn tries to work on her magic control, but she ends up blowing herself up again. Amused by this, Melita laughs at her and tells her to keep at it, or May might outgrow her and her miniature melons in years to come. Meanwhile, at the imperial capital, Oliver asks Miria how things are proceeding, and she reports that cities across the empire are suffering food shortages because she's attacking caravans on the road. Back in the mountains, everyone puts up a barrier to protect themselves, since Shin is about to experiment with new magic again. So Shin picks a stone and says it won't be dangerous, but on hearing this, the others put down their barriers. Just then, Shin starts channeling his magic into the stone, and to everyone's surprise, the stone starts floating. Curious, Ellie asks what kind of magic it is, and Shin says he just visualized the opposite of something falling. While they marvel at this, Shin drops the stone and casts the spell on himself, so he levitates and starts flying. After this, he explains that he created the spell since Oliver once used it while they battled. Quickly, May asks Shin to teach her, but Maria says she can't since everyone would see what's under her dress. Later, when Shin tells his grandparents that he got engaged, he apologizes for not telling them beforehand. Cicely then takes the blame, saying she couldn't wait to inform her parents, but Merlin says they're not blaming them, while Melita chips in that they'll have to settle something first before going public with the engagement. Just then, she says they need to visit Cicely's home. Shortly after, when they arrive there, Cicely's parents welcome them, and when they sit to talk, Melita reveals that Shin is not actually their grandson. After this, she asks if they'll still be interested in the engagement, knowing that Shin has no blood connection to them, and Cecil says he's disappointed that they'd think so lowly of them. In addition, he states that they approve the engagement because she values Cicely above everything else and tries to keep her safe. So Melita apologizes while Cicely points out that she didn't realize who Shin was when they first met. Shin then thanks Cicely's parents and vows to watch over her with all his strength. Later, the study group members try on a new uniform that Shin made for them, and Yuri asks if it has been enchanted with his defensive magic. In response, Shin explains that it's also enchanted with optical camouflage to help them hide in cozy temperature to keep them at a constantly comfortable temperature. In addition, he states that he could make their books into a jet like his, but using it might be tricky. Og then guesses that the day's training must be quite dangerous, and Shin confirms this by saying they'll be having a combat class against a catastrophic class demon. Shocked, Olivia says they can't, but Shin says they've all gotten good enough and adds that they're wearing maxed out defensive gear. When they prepare to leave, Mei laments about being left behind, but Og says it's to keep her safe. When she starts crying, Shin hands her a long-distance communication item enchanted to transmit and receive sound with magic. After they try it out, Og tells Mei to keep it and use it till they get back. Shortly after, as they move through the forest, Cicely senses something large nearby, and Shin confirms that it's a catastrophic class lion. He then explains that, unlike the agile tiger, the lion has mighty power, but moves slowly. When he asks Cicely what that means, she says that magic attacks from a distance might work against it, so he gives her a head rub while the others get jealous. Afterwards, Shin calls out Julius, Yuri, Mark, Cicely, and Olivia to take on the demon, but Og asks if he's sure since they all shine in support roles. In response, Shin says they're more than enough. Suddenly, the demon starts approaching them, but the team of 5 jointly attack with their spell and end up blowing up the demon. Surprised, Cicely asks about the demon, and Shin reveals that they defeated it, surprising them. He then turns to the others who specialize in attack magic and says that they can take on a demon each, since the supporting crew could take out one together. After they all take turns defeating the demons, the ladies comment on how amazing Tony was with a vibrating sword he used. When they ask how he got it, he says he borrowed it from Shin, so Julius grabs him and says he'd like to use it too, but Tony tells them to ask Shin, who then gets excited that everyone has improved. Afterwards, Og taps Shin and says he can't wait to see his engagement party. Some days later, while Shin dresses up for the party, Cicely shows up in the room all glammed up and leaves him dumbfounded. After an awkward silence, he apologizes for being awestruck and compliments her look. When Cicely returns his compliment, they start looking like they're about to devour each other. Just then, Eileen interrupts them and tells them it's time. Just then, they head into the dining room and are welcomed with applause. After this, Dis raises a toast to their engagement. Sometime later, the members of the Ultimate Magician group practice flying magic while Shin watches them from below. Impressed, he comments that they're finally taking shape, so Mei says she'd like to fly too and shows him that she's wearing briefs this time. Seeing this, Ellie says it's not demure, but Mei insists that it's better to show that. Just then, Shin calls his flying friends to return using a magical sound system he created. While they keep chatting in the air, Mei takes the microphone and tells them all to land. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Castle of Bluespur, Oliver is notified that the demonoids have taken over every town in the Empire and have stopped the food supply by attacking every caravan. Miria then adds that the nobles keep living large, making the starving commoner resent them and turn into demonoids. As a result, the demonoids slaughter the nobles and lay waste to the towns and villages. Shortly after, Oliver thanks his demonoids for their efforts in destroying the Empire, and the demonoids cheer on hearing this. After this, he wonders what to do next, since all he wanted was to overthrow the Empire. When he says he has nothing else to do, a demonoid named Fabro suggests conquering other kingdoms in the world. Uninterested, Oliver says they're all free to pursue whatever ambitions they have, so Fabro announces that he's leaving, and Oliver says anyone who agrees with him can leave too. Zest then asks if it's a good idea to let them go, but Oliver says it doesn't matter, since he already achieved his goal. Just then, Miria asks Oliver why he hates the Empire so much when he was once an Imperial Duke in line to become the Emperor. So, Oliver narrates how he was once a lord in a territory named Stratius. He had made agricultural reforms that improved their harvest, and while he talked with one of his subordinates, the man asked why he treated commoners favorably. In response, Oliver revealed that he once traveled to a foreign country where the commoners enjoyed a vibrant lifestyle. When the man asked which country it was, Oliver said it was the Kingdom of Earlshide. Back then, Oliver had a pregnant wife named Aurea who commended him for working for the people and worried about his health. During the time, Harold instigated some nobles against Oliver, and since he'll be favorable to commoners if he becomes the emperor, they connived to lure him to the capital. When Oliver got the letter of invitation from the nobles, he happily showed it to Aurea, but she warned him to be wary of them, since they might be plotting against him. However, Oliver assured her that he can handle himself, since he was once a demon hunter. Some months after he left home, some rumors were spread that Oliver kidnapped some commoners and sold them. Later, the nobles reported to Harold that Oliver wanted to return home because of his pregnant wife, so he suggested that they speed up their evil plans. Afterwards, they gathered some commoners and led them to intercept a carriage bearing Oliver's emblem. On inspecting the carriage, they found some kidnapped commoners in a cage, so the enraged commoners head to Oliver's mansion with torches and burn it down, along with his pregnant wife. On returning from the capital, Oliver found his mansion burning, and on getting there, it was too late to save his family. In his despair, Oliver asked the men why, and they accused him of kidnapping commoners and selling them. When the men stated that they saw a wagon with his crest transporting kidnapped people, Oliver said he would never do such a thing. Immediately, he realized he had been foolish to trust Harold and the nobles, and as he tears up, a dark aura surrounds him. Seeing this, the men ask him to forgive them, but Oliver screams and unleashes his powers on everyone nearby as he turns into a demonoid. After this, he vowed to get his revenge on the Empire and the nobles. After listening to Oliver's story, Zest discusses with a demonoid named Lawrence and says their master needs a new objective, so he orders orders Lawrence to lead the demonoids who were left to attack a nearby kingdom called Swede to lure Shin out and assess his strength. Back in Earlshire, a coronation ceremony was held for Og, so he approaches Dis on the podium and kneels, while Dis declares him the crown prince. Suddenly, a soldier rushes in to announce that a number of demonoids attack the kingdom of Swede. While the palace guards try to throw him out, Og thanks the soldier and states that the demonoids' situation takes priority. On hearing the news, the people panic, so Og assures them that there's a group capable of repelling the demonoids. He then calls on Shin and announces that they and their group have improved enough to defeat the demonoids. Suddenly, Og takes off his cloak, revealing his combat gear, and the other members of the group do the same. Just then, Dis tells Shin to address the people and figure out a group name on the spot. So he assures the people that the group has what it takes to defeat the demonoids and reveals that they're the ultimate magicians. Suddenly, they decide to give the people a show, so they levitate and fly towards Swede from the stage. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Swede, the soldiers at the borders spot the demonoids approaching and order the castle to be evacuated. Suddenly, the commander commands his men to deploy the defensive gear and request aid from Earlshire. While he wonders how long it'll take for reinforcements to arrive, Fabro and his men ride towards Swede as he orders them to destroy the walls. However, the guards quickly deploy the defensive gear, so the demonoids' attacks are absorbed. Meanwhile, Shin and his group fly towards the kingdom of Swede, and while he laments about the name he chose, Og comments that it's a nice name for the team. However, Shin berates him for putting him on the spot like that. Just then, Thor announces that they're about to get to the border, surprising Alice, who then says it would have taken them ages by carriage. Hearing this, Og comments that it's a good thing that they arrived on time, since Shin's defensive gear isn't indestructible. After this, Shin orders Cicely to look after the wounded while he tells the others to pair up and fight the demonoids. When Olivia pairs up with Mark, she promises to watch his back and tells him not to do anything crazy. On hearing this, Maria comments that everyone except her is in love, but Shin says that Julius and Thor are still single. However, Julius and Thor comment that they're both taken. In the kingdom of Swede, the demonoids chase down some people and cast explosive spells to stop them from running. Suddenly, Shin lands a kick on one of them and sends him crashing to the ground. Just then, another demonoid asks if they think they can take him on as mere humans, but Shin responds with a spell that blows him out of existence. Curious, the civilian asks who they are, and Thor says they're reinforcements from Earlshire. Somewhere else, Og announces to the soldiers that they've come to help and reassures them that they'll drive back the demonoids. After this, he tells the demonoids that they're cooked, so the citizens celebrate. Meanwhile, Lynn and Alice deploy their search magic and find a demonoid, so they go after him. But on getting there, the demonoid calls them little girls and asks if they want him to play house with them. Annoyed by this, Alice gets fired up and approaches the demonoid, but Lynn puts her fire out with water magic and says she gets sloppy when excited. Hearing this, Alice says she's calm and decides to fight with a level head, but Lynn tells her that the demonoid is dead. While Alice marvels at this, Lynn explains that she took him out with some sand and high-pressure water. Nearby, they hear a soldier groaning, and when they check it out, a demonoid beats him up, and just when he tries to finish him off, Alice and Lynn rush in to block the attack with a barrier. When the demonoid calls them little dolls, Alice snaps and roasts him alive. After this, they help the soldier and assure him that their friend can treat him at the aid station, so the soldier says he'll walk there by himself. Somewhere else, Julius and Thor face off against some demonoids, and while they deal with them, Thor hurts one of them and asks if they're acting on Oliver's orders, but the demonoid refuses to talk, so he cuts the demonoid a few more times, revealing that they thought they could easily take over the country with their numbers. In response, Thor asks how they could do that when they're former citizens of the Empire. The demonoid says that all they could do was hate when the nobles took everything from them. Suddenly, the demonoid charges up and says they're disgusted by people who live peacefully and comfortably behind walls. However, Julius says it doesn't give them the right to take lives at will. At the same time, some other demonoids corner some soldiers, and while they mock them, Yuri freezes up one of them. Just when the other demonoid tries to retaliate, Tony cuts him open using his sword. Meanwhile, some other demonoids decide to attack some humans, but just when Mark draws his sword, Olivia throws a rock at the demonoids. Seeing this, the other demonoids attack with an axe, but are cremated mid-air by Mark. Back at the aid station, Cicely heals the wounded and orders the other healers to give priority to those hurt the most. At the same time, many demonoids attack Shin, but he obliterates them without blinking and taunts them by calling them weaklings. Watching this, Lawrence wonders where Shin gets the force of his magic from and recalls the moment when Oliver says he got beaten in their last duel. Somewhere else, Maria scans the area and says they've cleared, but just when Og warns her to keep her guard up, Farod shows up and identifies Og as the Prince of Earlfield. In response, Shin says he's there to send the demonoids back to wherever they came from. However, Farad threatens to take down Og's head, thinking he's the leader of the group, so Og clarifies that he's not the leader. After this, he threatens to pound Farad's head in and eliminate the others while to fight. Suddenly, Maria launches a sneak attack on Farad, but he evades the attack and says he was thinking of making her his woman. Maria then responds by saying he's not her type. He then attacks and lands a punch on Maria, but her gear takes the hit, so he grabs her and throws her into the wall. When she gets back up, Farad realizes her gear must have been rigged somehow. Just when when he celebrates the bruise on her cheek, the bruise heals by itself. Suddenly, Maria retaliates with an explosive fire spell. However, when the dust clears up, she discovers that Farad protected himself using a defensive gear he took from a fallen soldier. He then challenges them to come at him, so Og and Maria jointly attack him while he blocks their attacks using the gear. Shortly after, they overwhelm the barrier with attacks, and when it shatters, he gets hit by a fire spell. Just when he gets back up, Og blows a hole through him. Just then, Lawrence realizes that Shin and the other are on their A-game, and the demonoids will be wiped out if they don't act quickly. At the same time, Zest realizes his plan to lure Shin out failed, so he regrets the loss of demonoids, and since it'll be difficult for Lawrence to call their retreat alone, he asks Miria to help out. Shortly after, Miria blows up the city gates with a fire spell and challenges the humans. Meanwhile, at the aid station, while Cicely heals the injured with her magic, a woman rushes in and begs her to have a look at her husband. On getting there, she finds the man bleeding out, so she rushes over to help. After sensing the explosion at the city gate, Shin wonders what kind of magical power it was. Meanwhile, Miria takes out a guard, and just as she tries to obliterate others, Alice and Lin jump in to block the attack using their barriers, while telling the soldiers to escape. Mirai then asks who they are, and they introduce themselves as the ultimate magicians. Suddenly, they cast attack spells on Miria, but she evades them all effortlessly and hits Alice with a counterattack from behind. Immediately, Alice heals up, making Miria realize she's wearing an enchanted gear. Despite this, Miria takes Alice to the washhouse and takes her hostage to prevent Lin from casting more spells. Just then, Miria comments that they are amateurs. Somewhere nearby, Lawrence senses the arrival of reinforcements, so he casts an area-wide spell and orders all the demonoids to retreat. Just when some demonoids think of disobeying the order, Shin shows up and wipes them out one after another. He then sees them escaping on the roofs, so he levitates and obliterates them in their numbers. Suddenly, Shin spots an explosion from afar, and the ultimate magicians rush to the location to rescue Alice from Miria, but they end up getting thrashed badly. On seeing her friends get beaten, Alice powers up to retaliate, but Miria knocks the fight out of her with a rock-bending spell. As Miria approaches Yuri, Shin arrives and tells her to stop. On seeing his defeated friends, Shin gets pissed, and when Lin tells him that Miria is not an amateur, Shin assures her that neither is he. Just then, Shin tells Yuri to tend to the others while Miria decides to find out how strong he really is. Suddenly, she attacks him, and Shin blocks her attack with a single-layered barrier, surprising her as her outfit rips from Shin's sword attack. Just then, Shin's friends show up offering to help, so Miria figures it's her chance to escape and knocks Maria down before leaping into the sky. Quickly, Shin enchants his feet and dashes after her, but Maria casts an explosive spell from the sky, targeting every one of Shin's friends. Suddenly, he tells Og to protect everyone, but since Og could only shield those around him, Shin puts up a barrier, protecting them all from Miria's explosive spell. After Miria escapes, Shin realizes all his friends are safe and states that Miria is pretty strong. Meanwhile, Og wonders why the demonoids attacked and says he couldn't sense Oliver's presence. Shin then confirms that they would have had it tougher if Oliver had shown up. Later, while the demonoids retreat, Miria meets up with Lawrence and says that Zest sent her to create a chance for them to retreat. Unknown to them, Oliver watches them from above, disappointed in them, and looks forward to having some fun with Shin. At the aid station, Og and Tony descend from the sky, surprising the guards who assume they're demonoids. However, they explain that they're with the ultimate magicians, so they head in and find their comrades healing the injured with their magic. Meanwhile, Cicely is still trying to heal the bleeding man, but when she's at her limits, she apologizes and says there's nothing more she can do. Suddenly, the woman starts crying, so Cicely takes off her gear to put it on the man, while explaining that it's enchanted with auto-healing magic. Suddenly, Shin stops her and says he'll take care of the bleeding man, so he activates his healing magic and channels it to heal each area by turns. Moments later, he announces that the man is now stable, so the woman thanks him. As Shin rises to leave, Cicely grabs him and says she feels miserable for being unable to heal the man. However, Shin states that she's the reason the man is still alive because she kept him alive till he got there, and points out that she healed other people too. Some days later, a ceremony was held to reward the ultimate magicians, and Og takes the chance to propose an alliance between Earlside and Swede to combat Oliver and his minions. When he points out that Oliver's intention for the attack remains unclear, Swede agrees to the proposition. Afterwards, Shin says they could have reduced the lives lost if they had used a gate and arrived at Swede on time. However, Maria points out that they can only open gates in places where they've been before. So, Shin and Og agree to protect the world together while the other also declare that they'll help them. On returning to Earlshide, the people celebrate the return of the ultimate magicians while Shin cringes when he hears it. Suddenly, May and Ellie run up to welcome Og, and when he says they shouldn't be there, Dis says he permitted them. Just then, Merlin and Melita point out that their training paid off and commend them. Later, Og tells Dis about the alliance and offers to be the negotiator with the other nations, since he's the prince and also a member of the ultimate magicians, so Dis agrees. Just then, Shin asks his grandparents for permission to help Og, and they ask him to look after the world. After this, May and Ellie say they'll go on the journey with them, but Og says it's not a trip to the Maldives. However, Shin disagrees, saying it's wrong to neglect his fiancée fiancé and sister. Meanwhile, at the castle in Blue Sphere, Oliver tells his subordinates that he warned them to leave Shin alone, and Zest apologizes for bringing him shame. However, Oliver says it was fun to watch, and adds that he had hoped they'd go harder at him. Some days later at Earlshide, the ultimate magicians prepare to leave. Og bids Dis farewell, while Shin bids his grandparents farewell. After this, they all activate their flight magic and take off, while Ellie comments that Og seems happier since he met Shin. In response, Og asks if she still thinks he drives stick, but she says she knows that Shin has eyes for only Sicily. When Og asks what she's driving at, Ellie says she's jealous of their friendship and adds that she was hoping to shake them up for a bit. Later, while Merlin and Melita enjoy the silence, Merlin says it's been a while since they've been alone together. Just when they start getting ideas, a gate opens, and the ultimate magicians walk in, complaining about having nowhere to stay, surprising Merlin and Melita. If you made it to the end of this video, confuse the fake fans by commenting Miria is goated. If you like more videos like this, like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.